gentleman yields back, the chair recognizes the ranking member, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Coal mining has, and much of the abandonment of these mines have left a toxic legacy of contaminated soil, polluted waters, and public health disasters across the country. And while I'm proud of the more than $11 billion passed in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act to help states and tribes clean up abandoned coal mines, I do think it's important to reiterate that these are not costs that the American public should have to pay. This is a responsibility of mines and private companies that inflict this damage. And it's yet another example of the ways in which these large companies often privatize benefits and profits and socialize the costs and harm. And for the public to have to pick up the tab on this demonstrates the failure for us to properly assign and enforce that responsibility, that financial responsibility, where it belongs. The mines we're cleaning up with the IIJA funds were abandoned before SMACRA was enacted, the law to ensure coal companies clean up after themselves. Mr. Morgan, in just a couple of sentences, to make sure that we can refresh to folks that are following along at home, what is SMACRA in the most simple terms possible, and how does it apply differently to mines that were abandoned before and after it was enacted?
Thank you, Ranking Member. So SMACRA was passed by Congress in 1977 to address the then-present crisis of thousands of abandoned mines across the country, and it sought to address that in 2 ways. One was through creating Title IV, which is a fund used to clean up the existing inventory of abandoned mine lands present at that time. But Congress also wanted to avoid a recurrence of those abandoned mines. So SMACRA also includes Title V, which primarily consists of 2 components. One is a reclamation requirement that companies conduct reclamation contemporaneously with coal removal. And then the second part is a bonding requirement, which ensures that if a company does go out of business, there are adequate funds to the regulator to complete the mine cleanup.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. And yet, as we heard earlier in your testimony today, many modern coal mines are going unreclaimed. And right now, we are at risk of yet another wave of abandoned mines, another wave of destroyed land, another wave of environmental and health outcomes. And Mr. Morgan, if SMACRA was meant to ensure that modern reclamation would be fully paid for by the industry, these are the folks that are supposed to be paying for it, then how did we get to this point of these abandoned modern mines? And how are companies actually evading their healthcare, pension, and reclamation responsibilities?
So there's 3 primary problems with the implementation of SMACRA that's leading to these problems. So first, the contemporaneous reclamation requirements are not being enforced, which allows mine operators to accumulate significant acreages of disturbed land. And then when those companies run into financial difficulties, that increases the reclamation burden passed on to taxpayers. The second part is when regulators set bond amounts, they fail to require adequate bonding. So in the recent bankruptcy of Black Jewel, the Kentucky regulator in the bankruptcy proceedings filed documents saying that they looked at 20% of the company's permits. So that was 33 permits. And they found a reclamation bonding shortfall on those 33 permits of $28 million. And then the third problem is the form of bonds that are provided are ones that do not ensure that the money will be there. So many of the eastern states rely on bond pools, which don't have adequate funding and are at great risk of being overwhelmed by the bankruptcy of even a single operator. Even surety bonds, which are supposed to be the most secure, run into difficulties because a very small number of surety bond providers have issued the overwhelming number of those bonds, meaning that if they fail, which they could do if even one big mine operator goes out of business, it would wipe out that surety and all the bonds they've provided.
Thank you very much, and I yield back to the chair.